My name is Ernie Chambers. I came across a very disturbing article in the Omaha World Herald dated July 17th, and it related to the kidney problems that Black people have. The headline says, kidney experts say it's time to remove race from medical algorithms. These algorithms are just mathematical formulas where they put certain items together, then they arrive at a conclusion. And these experts cite potentially worse outcomes for Black persons who are patients, whether it has to do with diagnosis, dialysis, overall treatment, getting on the wait list for a kidney transplant, then waiting more time before a plant transplant occurs. One thing that these medical professionals have started to doing, and it's based on the ferment in the country about racism in general, is to see that this racism affects even the medical profession where it ought not be. There's an oath that people take when they enter medicine. It's called the Hippocratic Oath. A guy, as happens in so many instances, long ago in Greece was named Hippocrates, and he came up with this oath. The main element of it says, first, do no harm. First, do no harm. The worst thing that a medical practitioner can do is to be the cause of an ailment or the making of that ailment worse. So here is the article, and it's from Kaiser Health News, a healthcare publication. Alfonso Harriet recently came across a newspaper clipping about his grandfather receiving his 1000th dialysis treatment. His grandfather later died at a dialysis center, as did his uncle, both from kidney disease. Quote, and that comes in my mind on my weak or bad days. Are you going to pass away just like they did, said Harriet, 46, who also has the disease. Suppose this happened to you and your family. You're an ordinary person. You're not an expert in anything, but you've heard about that are genetic. That means it's passed on from parents to the children. If you had a father who died from a certain disease, then an uncle who died from that same disease under similar circumstances, then you could begin to wonder, what is your situation? Quote the question, and that comes in my mind on my weekdays. Are you to pass away just like they did? In other words, is something wrong with me because I descended from my father, and therefore death at an early age is in store for me? Harriet does not like to dwell on that. He has gigs to play as a musician. Anybody who has played music for a living or a partial living know how stressful that can be. You might get a gig and go there and find out it's been canceled. You might get one. There are not many people. If what you get is based on the size of the gate, then if not many people come, you don't get much money. So it's not a recreational activity. It's one that can produce stress. So he has gigs to play as a musician. He has a ministry to run with his wife. Now, I grew up in a holiness church. It was what I call a religious straitjacket. And for some reason, people misspell that word. It's not S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T, it's S-T-R-A-I-T, straight. That's one of those jackets, as they call them, that has no buttons, but it has sleeves that they bring into the back of you and tie them in a knot. You are not able to move. So in this church, you couldn't go to the show. There are many things that kids in the neighborhood could do that we could not. So I began to look at people very carefully who were in church. And when I saw that they didn't practice what they preached, that made what they preach seem not like it ought to be to me. So if this man is running a religious operation, a ministry with his wife, that can also be very stressful. When you have a condition, no kind of stress is helpful, because if you don't have a condition, enough stress can give you one. At any rate, he also has children to protect at school as a security guard. So he plays as a musician, he has a ministry with his wife, and he serves as a school security guard. That's not all. He must juggle all that around 3 trips each week to a dialysis center in Alton, Illinois. And that's about 20 miles from his home in St. Louis. And the purpose for going to this center, obviously, is to clean his blood of the impurities his kidneys can no longer flush out. So he's got not a single whammy, not a double whammy, not a triple whammy, but a quadruple whammy. And for those who've heard the word whammy but don't know where it came from, there was a comic strip called Little Abner, and this guy created all kinds of characters like Sadie Hawkins Day, Lena the Hyena, and he had a guy named Evil Eye Fleagle, a small guy, but if he put the evil eye on you, it could do great damage. And that was called a whammy. If he hit you with a double whammy, that was curtains. So here is a man who had a quadruple whammy. When he made that 20-mile trip from his home to St. Louis, remember he had to make a 20-mile trip back home. So it was a 40-mile round trip 3 times a week to get treatment to clean the impurities from his blood that his kidneys could not filter out. He's waiting for a transplant, just as his uncle did before him. And he doesn't think that the prognosis is good for that because of what happened to his uncle and what was happening to his deteriorating condition. Quote, "It's just frustrating," Harriet said. "I'm stuck in the same pattern." Thousands of other Americans with failing kidneys are also stuck going to dialysis as they await new kidneys that may never come. That's especially true of Black patients like Harriet. How many of you who are Black are surprised by that statement? If you're old enough to know you're Black, you're old enough to not be surprised. Anything that has value, we get less of it. Anything that's negative, we get more of it. So here's a man needing a kidney transplant. But let me continue. These people who are on dialysis are 4 times as likely to have kidney failure as white Americans. And they make up more than 35% of the people who are on dialysis. But in the population, we comprise only 13%. So 13% of the population have 35% of the people on dialysis. 13% of the population. They're also less likely to get on the wait list for a kidney transplant and less likely to receive a transplant once on the list. So it's an accumulating list of problems that are not properly diagnosed, not properly treated because of this so-called algorithm, a mathematical something based on race. Race is not even a scientific or biological term. It's something that they call a societal construct. It means that society has selected a group of people and hung this term race on them, and it has no basis in biology or science. An algorithm doctors use may help perpetuate such disparities. It uses race as a factor in evaluating all stages of kidney disease care, diagnosis, dialysis, and transplantation. If you leave out transplantation, you have the 3 Ds: diagnosis, dialysis, death. That's the formula that Black people face. An algorithm doctors use may help perpetuate these disparities. It's a simple metric that uses a blood test plus the patient's age, sex, and whether they're Black. It makes Black patients appear to have healthier kidneys than non-Black patients, even when their blood measurements are identical. So if this is going to be based on science, how is it that when all of these other factors are the same, when it comes to a Black person, and you're considering the same factors and the blood work, blood measurements are the same, the doctors say, well, Black people have healthier kidneys. So if your kidneys are healthier, you don't need to get the treatment. Since white people have less healthy kidneys, they are first in line when it comes to diagnosis, dialysis, getting on the wait list, then the actual transplant. But to continue, quote, it is as close to stereotyping a particular group of people as it can be, said Dr. Rajneesh Mehrotra. He is a nephrologist with the University of Washington School of Medicine. A nephrologist is a person who specializes in kidney functions and diseases. He said, he is a doctor, he's recognized that this is as close to stereotyping a group as it can be. When you stereotype a group, you take away all individual distinctions, you put one general classification, and you say all of them come under this classification because it applies to all of them, and the classification itself may be erroneous. But stereotypes are used to justify the mistreatment, unequal treatment of those who are considered unpopular in society, whether it's based on race, sex, sexual orientation, or any of a number of other non-determining factors. This race coefficient has recently come under fire for being imprecise, leading to potentially worse outcomes for Black patients and less chance of receiving a new kidney. A national task force of kidney experts and patients is studying how to replace it. Some institutions have already stopped using it. If you have institutions that are prestigious, that they are involved in a certain area of operation, and there is a problem with the way people in this activity are conducting their business, and these prestigious operations no longer will use that methodology, shouldn't that carry some weight? If you're interested in following the science and the findings of medicine, it would. But if the overarching goal is to keep those who are on the outside, those who are discriminated against, continually discriminated against, then you continue to use something that perpetuates that discrimination. And when it affects medicine, it is one of the worst things that can happen. Fortunately for me, I'm 84 years old now. I never had a bedridden experience in my life. Even as a child, I had no sickness that made me stay in bed. Now, when I saw that other kids who got sick stayed in bed and didn't have to go to school, I would like to have tried to fake it, but because of the kind of religious upbringing I had, God might call your name right then, and it's curtains. So I never was bedridden as a child. The only time I was ever in the hospital for treatment was a point after being 70-something years old when I got a colonoscopy. Now, my belief is if I'm going to go to a doctor and get evaluated and a treatment is recommended, unless that treatment is to jump from the 13th story in the Empire State Building without a parachute, I'd use my judgment and not do that. But when it comes to something that's strictly medical, and I've gone to the doctor for treatment, I will accept the doctor's diagnosis. And I believed that a colonoscopy was a wise preventative. So I set up an appointment. The doctor gave me a list of things to do prior to getting the colonoscopy. There's some thick liquid that you drink. People say it's nasty tasting. Didn't taste nasty to me, so maybe it's good that people overemphasize how bad something is. Then when it's not that bad, it seems almost good. I drank all of that as I was supposed to. I drank the amount of water that I was supposed to. I didn't eat food before I went for the colonoscopy. I didn't drink any pop or any liquid that had any coloration because it would interfere with what they were going to do. When I went there, I stretched out like they stretch you out, put on this gown. They put these two little things in my nose. And the next thing I knew, they were taking the things out. I said, what happened? Did something go wrong? They said, we're through. I said, you're through with the colonoscopy? They said, yes, we're through. I didn't feel anything. I wasn't aware of the passage of time. And when I got the report, it said that I had the cleanest colon of anybody who had ever been examined. There's part of that goes up, a part that transverses, then a part that goes down. All of that was as clean as a chitlin. Women, I shouldn't say like our expression, clean as a chitlin, because chitlins are guts, but they're not clean at all. So I got the colonoscopy, and when it was over, I was talking to a doctor and explained how I don't go to the hospital for anything. He said, you're lucky. Stay out of the hospital as long as you can. I said, I don't go to doctors. He said, you're lucky again. If you don't have anything that requires medical treatment, don't go to a doctor. But let me tell you this, when time came, because Cyrus the virus was on the move, and Cyrus was desirous that he could expire us, and they said, get a vaccination. Not only did I get the vaccination, I notified the media so that they could come and show this Black man, who after it was over, referred to me as the most skeptical person in Nebraska, getting this shot in my arm. And when I put that 84-year-old arm up there for that needle, they said, wow, I haven't seen an arm buff like that on a young guy. I said, but if there's a young guy with an arm buff like this, and he doesn't get this shot like I'm getting, he may not live long enough to be my age and get it. So after I got that shot and it appeared in the paper, there was a man who works with the VA hospital, and he talked about how difficult it was to get people to come for the test. And he told them, Chambers is the most skeptical man you can find. And if he got the shot, what's wrong with you? Well, unfortunately, there are people who have been diagnosed with kidney disease. They want the treatment. They want it and can't get it. And those who get it are put to so much trouble that it's disheartening, and the stress that is generated can aggravate the condition. That's what I'm dealing with in a roundabout way that this article deals with directly. Being our color, our quote race, should not result in our not getting the treatment we need. We should not have a science-based test over here for white people and a hope, luck, pray something over here that even doctors say makes no sense. You put together not a biological test, not a scientific test, but a mathematical algorithm in which you put factors where Black people are concerned that are not present when you're diagnosing white people. So you have to come out with a bad result. I cannot take a crooked ruler and draw a straight line, but that's what they want to do with us when it comes to kidney disease. I'm not exaggerating. I knew nothing about any of this until I read this article. And when I read it, at first, I felt that fury that I always feel when I see where those who know better are perpetuating discrimination. But when it's literally a life and death situation, and it impacts young people too, it goes into outrage. But to continue with this article, I'm going to reread the paragraph where I stopped. This race coefficient has recently come under fire for being imprecise, leading to potentially worse outcomes for Black patients and less chance of receiving a new kidney. A national task force of kidney experts and patients is studying how to replace it. Some institutions have already stopped using it. If you know it's no good, what is there to study? Just stop it. But when it comes to trying to help those who are on the underside of the garment, they study forever. cannot reach a conclusion, but to continue. How best to assess a patient's kidney function remains uncertain. And some medical experts say fixing this equation is only one step in creating more equitable care, a process complicated by factors far deeper than a math problem. The algorithm creates a math problem. You can't even rely on the algorithm. But when you try to apply that defective mathematical formula to an area of medicine where sometimes it's hard to make a diagnosis when you're following the science and the medicine, how much worse is it for people who have not only a whammy, a double whammy, a triple whammy, but a quadruple whammy, just trying to live like a human being with your dignity, your self-respect, able to take care of your children. And if you have children and you have to go to the dialysis, imagine the impact on them. Children now know how to use the computer. They can look things up. And if they read what I'm reading now, and their father has kidney problems that require him to go on dialysis, what they learn from that computer that gives them information would cause them even more pressure because their father is one who's going to be victimized. Quoting a Dr. Deirdre Cruz, who is a nephrologist and the Associate Director for Research Development at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Equity. Johns Hopkins is one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the country. Here's what she said. There are so many inequities in kidney disease that stem from broader structural racism. Broader structural racism, the racism that overarches the life of all Black people, have an effect on how kidney medicine is practiced. So those overarching racist problems, racial problems, are affecting nephrology, which is the treatment and study of kidney functions and diseases. It's just a sliver of what the broader set of issues are when it comes to both disparities and inequities in who gets kidney disease in the first place and then in the care process. So if they don't even use a proper way to diagnose kidney problems in the first place, then those people are going to get no care at all. So she says, both disparities and inequities in who gets kidney disease in the first place and then in the care processes. We used to be told as children that if you drink a lot of pop, not only are you going to wet the bed, but you're going to ruin your kidneys. Let's say you drink a lot of pop, you manage not to wet the bed because you get up, but then you begin to wonder if your kidneys are ruined. You don't have any way of knowing for sure. You're a kid, so you go get checked and they say you're okay. You're a teenager, you're okay. You're a young adult, you're okay. You're middle-aged, you're okay, and you've got kidney disease, but you don't know it. And they don't tell you because they're using a system based on math that includes you out. And that kidney disease is moving at a rapid rate. You happen to go to a doctor who forgets the algorithm and who begins to use some science and some medical principles and says, partner, you got kidney disease. We're going to get you on dialysis immediately. So you get on dialysis. Like this man, you make 3 trips a week, 40 hours round trip. You got 3 jobs and you got kidney disease and this dialysis. But because the doctor who diagnosed you properly and you got dialysis is not the one who determines whether you get on the kidney wait list. So your condition is worsening. Finally, it's so bad they put you on the wait list. But something they said they noticed about Black people who get on the wait list, once they're on the wait list, it takes longer to get a kidney transplant. But while waiting for that kidney, their disease progresses a lot faster. How is that? How do you correlate the fact that merely getting on the wait list seems to accelerate the worsening of your kidney condition? That's not what causes it. Once you're on the wait list, you might have a better person keeping track of what's happening to you. And whereas it seems based on that misdiagnosis that said your kidneys are healthier, that now you're on your wait list, they're diminishing in health even quicker. Not so. The racism that starts out as a little seed pretty soon grows into the beanstalk that grew up into the clouds, and Jack climbed it and made it to the giant's castle. I hope I'm not losing any of you all by these digressions, but I have to do things my way. I'm going to read this again. This misdiagnosis is just a sliver of what the broader set of issues are when it comes to both disparities and inequities in who gets kidney disease in the first place, and then in the care process. Then a subheadline, why race has been part of the equation. Kidneys filter about 40 gallons of blood a day, like a Brita filter for the body. They keep in the good stuff and send out the bad through urine. But unlike other organs, kidneys don't easily repair themselves. There's a point of no return, said Dr. Cynthia Delgado, a University of California, San Francisco nephrologist who is leading the task force working on the national recommendation to ditch or get rid of the racial part of the equation. Furthermore, it's hard to gauge whether kidneys are working properly. Gold standard tests involve a chemical infusion. That means putting something in you, and hours of collecting blood and urine to see how quickly the kidneys flush the chemical out. An algorithm is much more efficient. Now, an algorithm is that mathematical formula. It might be more efficient, but is it more effective? Continuing, buoyed or uplifted by activism around structural racism, those seeking equity in healthcare have recently been calling out the algorithm as an example of the racism baked into American medicine. It has become a part of American medicine. Researchers writing in the New England Journal of Medicine last year included kidney equations and a laundry list of race-adjusted algorithms used to evaluate parts of the body, from heart and lungs to bones and breasts. Some Black women who've gone for breast examinations. One woman mentioned how her sister's breast was put between two plates and they pressed it so hard she was screaming. So she went in where her sister was and saw what happened and made them release her, and not using bad language. She said to the doctor, suppose we put you up there and put your penis between those plates and mash your penis like you were mashing my sister's breast. That treatment probably was reserved for Black women. I'd never heard of it, neither had she or her sister. And when she asked the nurse, why would her sister be screaming? The nurse professed not to know why, but to continue. Oh, with algorithm, everything from heart and lungs to bones and breasts, they can perpetuate or even amplify race-based health inequities. Inequities mean unfair treatment. In March, ahead of the National Task Force's upcoming formal recommendation, leaders in kidney care said race modifiers should be removed. What did, you know, that lady, she was married to that crazy guy who played the guitar, and she sang very, very forcefully. And her song was, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a real old fashioned motion or notion or something? I can't sing. She can. And you all know her name, but I'm not going to tell you. You all are trying to holler through here and tell me what her name is, huh? I'm picking it up, but I know it already. I'm just not going to tell you. So when you got kidney problems, the doctor knows what you've got. He knows because he hears it singing like that lady whose name I almost mentioned, but he's not going to tell you. Continuing, all these race modifiers should be removed. And Fresenius Medical Care, one of the two largest US dialysis companies, said the race component is problematic. They make the dialysis equipment and they're saying problematic. When people at this level say problematic, that's the same as somebody who is not prettifying the language as saying it's devastating, it is wrong, it is criminal. Until the late 1990s, doctors primarily used the Cockcroft-Gault equation. It did not ask for race, but used age, weight, and the blood level of creatinine, a chemical that's basically the trash left after muscles move. A high level of creatinine in the blood signals that the kidneys are not doing their job of disposing of it. But the equation was based on a study of just 249 white men. Then researchers wrapping up a study on how to slow down kidney disease realized they were sitting on a mother lode of data that could rewrite that equation. The gold standard kidney function measurement from about 1,600 patients, they could make use of information from 1,600 patients, 12% of whom were Black. That means 88% were white. They landed on something that accurately predicted the kidney function of patients better than that old equation, except it made the kidneys of Black participants appear to be sicker than the gold standard test showed they were. Now, if they appeared sicker, shouldn't they get more treatment? Let me continue. The authors reasoned it might be caused by muscle mass. White people say Black people have greater muscle mass. They say, look at Black guys in a locker room. They have definition, they have cuts. White guys look flabby and on like that. The authors reasoned it might be caused by muscle mass. Participants with more muscle mass would likely have more creatinine in their blood, not because their kidneys were failing to remove it, but because they just had more muscle producing more waste. So they, quote, corrected, unquote, Black patients' results for that difference. Now, they didn't prove what they said to be an accurate basis for diagnosing kidney problems. But once they satisfied themselves that Black people have a greater muscle mass, it meant those muscles were flexing and relaxing more, which means more work. And the more a muscle works, the more of these wastes are produced. The more waste produced, the more will show up when they're testing the kidneys. But now that they've convinced themselves that Black people have more of this waste in their system, not because their kidneys are removing it, but because of their muscles, then Black people who were showing up as needing kidney treatment, if they were judged like white people, were not getting that treatment. And once again, they wanted to say that your musculature makes you superior to white people, but they use that to give you something inferior. Anytime they put you up, how many of y'all know what a teeter-totter is? That's what we called it. Some people call it a seesaw. It's like this, and one person sits on this end, one sits on the other. The end that's heaviest goes down, the one lightest goes up, and a seesaw goes up and down, or the teeter-totter. That's why they say, I saw Esau sitting on the seesaw. I saw Esau with your girl. Well, when they want to cheat us, they put us on the low end of the teeter-totter. And they try to make it look like we're really on the high end so that we can be discriminated against, and they can say it's based on science. I'm going to go right ahead now, and I'll try not to digress. I'm going to skip some of this. Dr. Andrew S. Levy, a professor at Tufts University School of Medicine, who led the study, said it does not make intuitive sense to include race, now widely considered a social construct, in an equation about biology. It makes no sense. Still, in 1999, he and others published the race equation, then updated it a decade later. Though other equations exist that don't involve race, Levy's latest version, often referred to as the capital CKD EPI equation, is recommended for clinical use. This very doctor who said race should not be a factor is now using a race-based algorithm, if you want to call it that, or equation for clinical use. Who often winds up at clinics? Poor people and Black people. It shows a Black patient's kidneys functioning 16% better than those of a non-Black patient with the same blood work. Ours are working better, they say, when the blood work is the same as white people. So because ours are working better, we don't get the treatment. White people do get it. Removing the race number. Many patients don't know about this equation and how their race is factored into their care. Mr. Harriet said, I really wish someone would have mentioned it. He said it burned him up, quote, knowing that this one little test that I did not know anything about could keep me from or prolong me getting a kidney. Glenda V. Roberts curbed or slowed down, her kidney disease with a vegan diet and by conducting meetings as an IT executive while walking. But after more than 40 years of slow decline, her kidney function finally reached the cutoff required to get on the transplant wait list. When it did, the decline was swift, a pattern researchers have noted in Black patients. Quote, it really makes you wonder what the benefit is of having an equation that will cause people who look like me, Black people, to get referrals later, to have to wait longer before you can get on the transplant list, but then have your disease progress more rapidly, she said. That can be predicted by this algorithm used to diagnose Black people. Roberts, who is now the director, and Glenda Roberts is the one who is this executive. She is now the director of external relations at the University of Washington's Kidney Research Institute in Seattle and on the National Task Force. She said a genetic test added to her feeling that a Black/non-Black option in an equation was a charade. Quote, in fact, I am not predominantly of African ancestry. I'm 25% Native American. I'm Swedish and English and French, said Roberts. But I'm also 48% from countries that are on the continent of Africa. The Black/non-Black equation also doesn't make sense to Delgado, the University of California nephrologist. Quote, I would probably, for some people, qualify as being non-Black, said Delgado, who is Puerto Rican. Quote, but for others, I would qualify as Black. So theoretically, if Delgado were to visit two doctors on the same day and they guessed her race, instead of asking, she could come away with two different readings of how well her kidneys are working and two different methodologies of treatment, one that would be likely to guarantee death and one that would be likely to slow down her disease and prolong her life. Now, I was given a signal of how much time I have left, but I couldn't make it out. So I'm just going to let that be enough of this, except for one brief comment. And I'm going to do what people don't do. Could you hold fingers to show me how many minutes I've got left? Oh, I've got a little bit of time. So now I'm going to talk about something else that is along the same line. Now, when they were saying for the purpose of denying us treatment for kidney disease, that as Black people, our kidneys are healthier than white people. By being healthier, we didn't get the treatment. Now, what happens in football? Men were being concussed. They were getting concussions from playing football, being hit and hitting other players, like collisions. Somebody had calculated the amount of force generated by these huge men running at great speed and then crashing like locomotives on the same track going different directions. This idea of the concussions was overlooked. The main thing to do was keep a good player in the game. So even though they had medical persons on the sideline, these medical persons, some medical doctors, had a job to do, and it was not to look after the player's health. Oh, if he was knocked woozy, they'd put some small smelling salts like ammonia under him. He'd sniff it and jump, his eyes kind of focus. And they say, "How do you feel?" He said, "Coach, I feel fine." Well, a football player wants to play. Whether he felt fine or not, he'd say he did. The doctor knew better, but the doctor was paid by the club owner. And you notice that they call these people who have these teams owners. People who own other people are slaveholders. The ones owned are slaves. You shouldn't talk about owning people. But when you once give them that designation, you can treat them like livestock, things rather than people. You use them up and then you throw them away. And players don't feel like that song says, "So use me, baby, until you use me up." Although that's the way they will play until they just can't play any longer. Well, the effect of these concussions were known to the medical profession, but they would deal with them when they happened in other contexts. You were in an automobile accident, you fell off the ladder. People knew what a concussion was, but there were people in football who wanted good players to stay on the field so their team would win games, go to playoffs where more money is made, where the team has higher standing, can get higher draft picks or guys who are going to be drafted willing to come to their team. And these players were viewed as moneymakers, just as college players are viewed as moneymakers now. It took a Black doctor from Africa to diagnose this condition. He came to this country and they made a movie about him. Will Smith played this doctor. And these athletes started behaving very peculiarly. Some would commit suicide, some would be violent without warning after they got out of football. And he traced it to these conditions when he was doing autopsies. And he would talk to the person being autopsied. And he'd tell him, "You have to help me in this. I'm looking for something. I don't really know for sure what I'm looking for, but you have to talk to me. You have to tell me something." And the nurses and others looked at him and thought he was crazy. So they talked to the head guy. And when the man explained what he was doing, he was so, "Well, don't do that out loud because it makes these people nervous." But at any rate, he discovered that there was a connection between these concussions, the crazy actions of these retired athletes, and the hits they were taking in football. Doctors for the teams knew it, but they turned against this man and said he was a quack. He didn't know what he was talking about. They even tried to create problems where his life would be ruined and all the kind of things that white people with power know how to do to discredit somebody who's going to diminish their power or reduce their income. To make a long story short, the right publicity came and something was done to deal with these concussions. Athletes became aware of it, and there were players who began to notice while they were still playing that the moods that they had were changing. They would do things that might endanger themselves or their families. There was one guy, his name was Dave Durison, and I used to watch him. He played for the Chicago Bears, and he was one who had the brain problem, and he committed suicide. But because he didn't want people like him who played football and gave it their all to go through what he went through. You know what he did? He took the gun and shot himself through the heart so that his brain would be undamaged. And he told his family, give the brain to the medical people and let them examine it to see if they can find out what's going on with us, talking about football players. Those who did survive, did not commit suicide, were primarily Black, because Black people make up more than 60% of the players in the NFL. Well, the players union got a provision where there would have to be compensation after these players retired and they needed this treatment, and they should get some pension-like money to compensate for what had happened. Well, the algorithm came into play again, and the doctors were told by the NFL, not a medical association, but the NFL, we want you to develop this algorithm, which would establish that Black players, because they're Black, their brain starts off with lower cognitive ability, cognitive ability. Now, what they ought to do is have Tina Turner say, oh, I gave you her name. Anyway, have her sing a song about what they're doing to Black men. So when it comes to kidneys, because they don't want to give you treatment, they say your kidneys are working better than white people, so you don't get the kidney transplant. When it comes to the brain functioning, and it's clear that your brain, your cognitive abilities are at a lower level, the doctor said, well, you started at a lower level. Not that your brain works better than white people like they said your kidneys did. So on the one hand, when saying you are superior to white people in your physical components, it lowers the ability to get treatment. Over here, when we're talking about compensating them who have this low level of brain cognition, and it wasn't like that for every Black player. The doctors were saying it's your brain starts at a lower level. So the fact that you have this level of cognition, you haven't lost as much as the white player because his brain starts way up here. And then he gets down here where you are and then goes below that. Well, the Black men may have had cognition higher than the white men. Black men now play middle linebacker, which they were thought to be unable to because the middle linebacker calls signals on defense. They couldn't play quarterback because they couldn't call the signals. Now the top quarterbacks are Black. The top middle linebackers are Black. Look at Alabama. Their whole team is almost Black. So when they can use a logarithm that will deprive you of one thing over here by you being superior, it makes you superior. When over here, it would entitle you to get some compensation, then the logarithm shows that you're inferior. That same racism exists throughout the society. And what you're seeing now is these racists, the Republicans, trying to, in law or in the law, when you are trying to do away with something, well, I won't use the legal term. Well, I may as well, to expunge. When they want something out of the record, they say expunge it, erase it. Well, white people want to expunge American history, so you do away with slavery. You don't talk about George Washington being a slaveholder and making babies on Black women. Now you look at these Black women around here. How many white men, if they could own these women like cows, pigs, and chickens, wouldn't be having sex with them? Tell me. You know, and here's what the slave owners were doing. They were deliberately producing pregnancies in Black female slaves and then selling the children, their children, at auction. White people don't want that taught. They want to do away with it because they say, if you tell the truth about American history, little white children will not feel good about themselves. Well, if the truth hurts, isn't that what people say? The truth hurts. It doesn't have to hurt. You can explain what the purpose of truth is. We tell you bad things that happen to let you know that they are bad, and you should not do the same thing. That because somebody is a president or politician or preacher doesn't mean they don't do bad things. So if you got a bad preacher, that doesn't mean everything that preacher says is bad. Everything that a politician who is wicked does is not necessarily harmful. So education has to take away all of the ignorance. How can they learn if they're not taught? How can they teach if they're not sent? In other words, if those who teach don't know anything, how can they teach those who don't know? How can they know without a teacher? There's a verse in the Bible that says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. And there's a verse somewhere else that says, I think it's from Jeremiah, the crybaby prophet, always crying. Oh, that my head were water and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for my people. Then I'd add the next verse, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Where knowledge thrives, ignorance has to take cover. And where ignorance takes cover and knowledge thrives, artificial differences begin to disappear, and people who were deceived and by being deceived thought others were their natural enemies just because of the way they looked, begin to see that they have a lot more in common than they had that was different. And then if they get some genetic tests, they might find out they're even distantly related. All of this goes to the issue when I talk about it of saying that a point is going to have to be reached when people are judged as human beings. Anything born of a man and a woman is my brother if it's a man, is my sister if it's a woman. So if Cain came to me and asked the question he asked to God that God didn't answer, God said, where's your brother, Cain? Cain had killed him. Cain said, am I my brother's keeper? I would have to answer, I am my brother's and my sister's keeper to the extent that I'm able to provide what a keeper provides. But I would not be a keeper in the sense of a zookeeper on the outside of the bar. You are the animal that paces on the inside of the bars. I make you a spectacle. I'll deprive you of the dignity that even an animal should have so that I can debase you more, mistreat you, and if possibly, exploit you for monetary purposes. I never drink the last out of a cup of coffee. I don't know if it's superstition, but I'm not going to go to the very last minute. So this is probably as close as I can come. But remember, as that woman whose name I won't give you asked, what's love got to do with it? And we are not going to adopt the attitude of that Black man who said, use me, baby, until you use me up. No, we have to treat each other the way we want to be treated. And I wish people would let me do that. I'm the easiest person in the world to get along with. You determine what the relationship between us will be by how you treat me. And if you treat me wrong, then I know how to respond to that. And you cannot treat me better than I will treat you. All that from kidney disease. So you never know for sure where you're going to wind up until you get to the end of the trail when you have somebody like me talking to you. So I'm out of here for this time, and maybe in the future I will talk again.